Okay, all right. Shabbat shalom. Shabbat shalom. We are back. We are going to continue with our look through the Torah portion. As we look through this, we want to remember, that the last thing, the scriptures, the Torah, the scriptures in general is a pretty amazing book in that although we know that it is a literal book, it's a literal book with literal things inside of it that literally happen. We also have allegorical things inside of this book, and we also have types and shadows in this book where something that literally happened can also be metaphorical about something else. And in Genesis 37, we look over here and we see where it begins to speak about Joseph and his and the things that go on with him and his life with his brothers. We're able to see an excellent picture of Yeshua. So as we go through, we're going to look at actually going on um, with Joseph, but we also want to try to remember and look at the things that we see with Joseph and his story, the things that kind of correlate with Messiah and what he did and who he was and is for us. It's interesting that when we look at some of the last moments, and in fact, let's just go there real quick. I'm just gonna pull it up real quick. It's interesting when we see in one of the last times that Yeshua spoke with his disciples. One of the things that he did, one of the most important things that he did, I would say, was what we're going to see over here. Let's see here. Let's look at start reading at verse 42, just so we can get some context here.
It says, and they gave him a piece of broiled fish and some honeycomb, and taking it, he ate in their presence. And he said to them, these are the words which I spoke to you while I was still with you, that all have to be fulfilled that were written in the Torah of Moshe and the prophets of Tehillim concerning me. Then he opened their minds to understand the scriptures, and he said to them, thus it is written, has been written. And so it was necessary for the Messiah to suffer and to rise again from the dead the third day.
That's good, right here. We really wanted to deal with this 44 over here, the fact that he opens up the Torah of Moses and the prophets and the Psalms and shows them the things that are concerning him. Now, if we go back in the Torah and the the prophets, if we go back into the Tanakh, all these things as he mentions over here, we don't see Yeshua's name by name. We don't see him mentioned by name. We see things that are pointed to him. We see things that kind of hint to who Messiah is, but there's no thing like if we go back, we're not gonna say like things that talk about Yeshua unless we're talking about like Joshua, the son of Nun, the successor of Moses. So we see that, I'm only saying this because I've spoken to people where they only want to look at the scriptures and deal with it from like a literal standpoint. Um, and everything else is just like is stuff that people make up. But it's interesting, yeah, it's interesting that Yeshua himself is going back in the Torah and showing the disciples where he is um, over there. Um, he talks to the Pharisees and he says to the Pharisees, if you learned of Moses, then you learned of me. But literally, the Torah don't talk about Yeshua like that, literally, from a literal perspective, right? So we have to be able to understand that within the Torah, we have these kind of under the surface undertones in the scripture of things that are showing us who Yeshua is, and who he's to be if we're looking in the Torah, looking forward. So saying all that just to say, when we look over at Genesis 37 and we look with Joseph, there's a lot of parallels between the life of Joseph and Yeshua, and we'll look at a few of those, um, several maybe even, as we go through. But I think we're just going to let's see. Let's just read through it and then double back, because I just wanted just to make sure that we have the context of everything. We'll read through it and then double back.
All the way to the bottom.
Yeah. Thanks.
It says, and Jacob dwelt in the land of his father's sojournings in the land of Canaan. For this is the genealogy of Jacob. Yosef, Yosef being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers, and the young man was with the sons of Bela and the sons of Zelpah, his father's wives. And Yosef brought an evil uh, report of them to his father. And Israel loved Joseph more than all his children, because he was of his old age. And he made him a long robe. But with his brothers, when his brothers saw that their father loved him more than all his brothers, they hated him and were not able to speak peaceably to him. And Joseph dreamed a dream and told it to his brothers, so they hated him even more. And he said to them, please listen to this dream which I have dreamt. See, we are binding sheaves in the midst of a field, and see, my sheaf rose up and also stood up. And see, your sheaves stood all around and bowed down to my sheaf. And the brothers said to him, shall you indeed reign over us? Shall you indeed rule over us? So they hated him even more for his dreams and for his words. And he dreamed still another dream and related it to his brothers and said, see, I have dreamed another dream. And see, the sun and the moon and the 11 stars bowed down to me. And he related it to his father and his brothers. And his father rebuked him and said to him, what is this dream that you have dreamt? Shall we, your mother, and I, and your brothers indeed come to bow down to the earth before you? And his brothers envied him, but his father guarded the word. And his brothers went to feed their father's flock in Shechem. And Israel said to Joseph, Are ye are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? Come, I send you to them. So he said to him, Here I am. And he said to him, Please go and see if it is well with your brothers and well with the sheep, and bring back word to me. So he sent him out of the valley of Hebron, and he went to Shechem. And a certain man found him and see, he was wandering in the field, and the man asked him, saying, "What do you seek?" And he said, "I am seeking my brothers. Please inform me where they are feeding their sheep." And the man said, "They have left here, for I have heard them say, 'Let us go towards Dothan.'" So Joseph went after his brothers and found them in Dothan. And they saw him from a distance, and before he came near them, they plotted against him to kill him. And they said to each other, "See, this master of dreams is coming. Now, then, come and let us now kill him and throw him into some pit, and shall say, 'Some wild beast has devoured him.' Let us then see what comes of his dreams." And Reuben heard and rescued him from their hands and said, "Let us not strike his beam." And Reuben said to them, "Shed no blood. Throw him into this pit which is in the wilderness, and do not lay a hand on him, in order to rescue him out of their hands and bring him back to his father." So it came to be, when Joseph had come to his brothers, and they stripped Joseph of his robe, the long robe which was on him, and they took him and threw him into a pit, and the pit was empty. There was no water in it. And they sat down to eat a meal. And they lifted up their eyes and looked and saw the company of the Ishmaelites coming from Gilead with their camels, bearing spices and balm and myrrh, going to take them down to Mitzrayim. And Yehuda said to his brothers, "What would we gain if we kill our brother uh, and conceal his blood? Come and let us sell him to the Ishmaelites, and let not our hand be upon him, for he is our brother, our flesh." And his brothers listened. And Midianite traders, passed by. So they pulled Joseph up and lifted him out of the pit and sold him to the Ishmaelites for 20 pieces of silver. And they took Joseph to Mizraim. And Reuben returned to the pit, and see, Joseph was not in the pit. And he tore his garments. And he returned to his brothers and said, "The boy is gone, and I, where am I to go?" So they took Joseph's robe and slew a male goat and dipped the robe in the blood. And they sent the long robe and brought it to their father and said, "We have found this. Please look. Is it the robe of your son or not?" And he recognized it and said, "It is my son's robe. An evil beast has devoured him. Joseph is torn to pieces." And Jacob tore the garments and put sackcloth on his waist and mourned for his son many days. And his sons and all the daughters arose to comfort him, but he refused to be comforted and said, "Now let me go down to Sheol to my son in the morning." So his father wept for him. And the Midianites had sold him in Mitzrayim to Potiphar, an officer of Pharaoh and captain of the guard.
Okay. All right. Okay. So a lot over there. We're gonna go back and look at some things here. When we look over here, when we go back over to the first verse over there. Oh, you need. Oh yeah. Sure. Go back to the beginning. A few times in the scriptures, we see. Actually, it's the second verse. We see over here the second verse over here where it says, "This is the genealogy. This is the genealogy of Yaakov." Sometimes we see that, and it gives you a literal genealogy. This is so and the son of so and so who begot him and who begot so on and so forth. We see that, but we also see it We also see it in other ways. Let me pull this. Let me put this over here. Hold on 1 second here. Okay, when we look at this word over here, which is translated as generations, tolda or toldot. Tolda would be the just the feminine form. Toldot then would be the plural form. Actually, and we can see even in the English where it says these are the generations, where it's talking about the plural use of this. I want to pull up this word study toldot. It says here this key Hebrew word carries with it the notion of everything entailed in a person's life. Make this bigger. And that of his or her progeny. In the plural, it is used to denote the chronological procession of history as humans shape it. It refers to the successive generations in one's family, or a broader division by lineage. Um, and in the word accounts of the history of the created world. So when we look at this word, how it's used over here, toldot, like I said, sometimes it's giving you an actual genealogy, but sometimes it's just about to give you some history about this or that. And so here it's beginning to tell this kind of historical account of Yosef and what happened, with the, I guess, the key events in his life. Um, and so when we look over here at this and we see in that second verse where it says that Yosef, being 17 years old, was feeding the flock with his brothers. And the young man was with the sons of Bilhah and Zilpah. Um, Over here, when we look at this and we see what's going on over here, we see, first of all, Yosef. Before we go too much further, I want to talk about this name over here because I started off talking about the fact that, we have within the story of Yosef, we have parallels and pictures that point us to Yeshua. So when we look and understand Yosef, and his name actually is prophetic. Now, when we look at Yosef's name and even how he was named, it's interesting because there was a significance with Joseph's name that was more. It was more. It had more to do with his mother. His mother than anything else. We just talked about this a few weeks ago when we looked at the birth of Yosef, dealing with his mother, who was barren at the time. And when she finally was able to give birth to a son, she has this son, and his name is He Will Add. Right? Yosef means, we look over here, it's the future of let him add. Right? So It's the future tense of this idea of being added to. So she's being added to already by a simple fact that she's having this child. And then her name for him is a request to for the adding to continue. He will add, is what Yosef means. And we talked about the fact that we see in her that his mother, this longing, this desire to have more, and her inability to be able to accept, the things that the Most High had blessed her with. Um, and then we also see then later on after that how she even dies having the next child, right, Benjamin. Um, and so when we look at Yosef, his name has significance, has that personal significance of the fact that his mother wanted more, right? Rachel wanted more. Oh, we can hear. Let's see. That is 30 and verse. Let's see here. Just see, read these two verses here.
And she conceived and bore a son and said, Elohim has taken away my reproach. So she called his name Yosef and said, Yahweh hath added to me another son.
Right. Okay. So again, when we look at the literal translation of this name, um, like even here, it's like in the past tense, added, right? But his name literally is the future tense of this deal. So we see that it kind of gives forth the idea of her longing for more, even though she just got this actual blessing, right? And so now when we look at beyond that, now beyond this kind of personal um kind of significance that we see in Joseph's name, we can think about what we already know about Joseph in terms of the future tense. Um, you know, when we look back and understand, what it is that Joseph adds to the situation after we go through the whole story of everything that he does, and he ends up being this great individual and ends up bringing his whole family into this land and being this great person and literally adding to the tribes, right, by his own sons being counted as part of Israel. So we can see it, with his name, the fact that in this kind of the spirit that it was given to him, it was kind of this kind of, you know, slightly selfish thing, and kind of not in the spirit of gratitude, from Rachel. But when we look at the broader sense of what he actually comes to become, we see that he literally will add to Israel, right? We see that he is, because of him, many things are, much favor is given to the people. Those 70 people that go into Egypt at that time. Um, so just wanted to bring that out in terms of the significance of his name. But when we look back at what's going on with the 17-year-old Yosef, when we look at this, we some of the different commentators of these verses talk about the fact that we have these sons of the handmaids, which would have been Dan and Naphtali and Gad and Asher, who it's referencing here, in terms of the sons of these handmaids who actually would have been older than him, probably not much older. He was still younger than them, but the older ones, like Leah's sons, it don't talk about them in this particular situation. And the commentators talk about the fact that even though even though those were his older brothers, um, just like when we see later with all of the brothers, you still kind of have this kind of separation because of the fact that Yosef was the son, the favored son of the father, the child of the most favored wife, and then you have the children of the handmaids. Now you can kind of just think about that dynamic, what that would even be like. You can think about how this. I mean, it's hard not to look at Joseph in this light and think of him as just kind of just this spoiled uh brat type uh person. It's hard for me to look at him and think about, I'm saying, this version of Joseph, the 17-year-old one. And you could just picture this because, well, we have siblings over here, right? And we know how things go with older and younger siblings. Um, the idea of the younger sibling being the one that's kind of controlling things is kind of a foreign thing, unless you have this kind of spoiled kind of factor that comes in. And now with uh uh you know just again, just thinking about how we are as human beings, there within families, there should be kind of this pecking order, right? The oldest is the one that's on top. The younger ones, they're supposed to fall in line, and when they don't, it causes like a little thing, right? And sometimes within that, apart from the parents, there's this kind of a little sibling justice things that go on outside of the eyes of the parents. And it's just a natural thing that we don't have to think. Those people that have siblings can understand how these things can kind of get go left. I mean, it gets extreme, where they talk about like killing each other, which is that's that's extreme. Um, but we can get the idea. So over here in verse 2, we see with them, Yosef is out with the siblings. Whatever's going on, we don't know. But Yosef, of course, has to be the one to bring back the evil report to his father. We don't know what happened, but all we know that kind of the dynamic between those brothers, Yosef, and then adding the father to the situation where Yosef is the one that goes back with the report of what happened. And here is a evil report, back to the father. Now, I don't know about you all, but just when I think about how things are with I actually was an only child for many years, and then when I gained a sibling, there's 10 years between us, so there was a huge gap where we didn't have that kind of a thing that closer siblings would have, where you're out doing stuff with them and all this. My thing was different. I might have been taking them somewhere. You know what I mean? I'm like the big brother there's a big difference between him and I, coming up. But closer siblings, they have this kind of thing together, and it kind of breaks the ranks and codes of things to go back then now and be be telling, right? um so we can see just with that dynamic that existed with Yosef, where he's kind of becomes at odds with his siblings because of the fact that he's going back and telling on his brothers over here. And so we see in verse 3 where it talks about the fact that Israel loved Yosef over here more than all his children because of the fact that he was the son of his old age. And then, so when we look at the King James, it translates as this robe over here. What's that say in the King James at the end of verse 3 there? Mm-hmm. When we look at this, I don't think there's any place in the scriptures where that's used in that way to have the idea of colors. And we've always thought about this coat of many colors that he wore. But when we look at the scriptures version, it's giving you this thing where it's kind of dealing with this kind of a long, it says long robe, right? This word over here, properly palm of hand and sole of foot. So it's saying long because it's this thing that's coming that has these long sleeves that come down to the palm, and this long coat that goes down to the feet. So it's this long, elaborate thing. And the idea of colors is kind of can be hinted to, we see over here. But when we look at how it's used in other places, I don't think we see it in that used in that way. Let's see. I'm saying, okay, this is always talking about the coat. What's this say here? 2 Samuel 13. Let me pull that up over here. What does this say? Read this here.
And she had a garment of diverse colors upon her, but with such robes were the king's daughters that were virgins of apparel. Then his servant brought her out and bolted the door after.
Okay, very good. So it's translated there as, I guess when you read it in this translation, it makes sense of being diverse colors. But I guess if you said that there was a long robes, I'm just saying it's not the literal definition of what that is, where it can mean colors in terms of that. But I think the thought of it is kind of this elaborate long kind of royal type of over the top ish thing, right? Where colors could be included, but I think the kind of the massiveness, the grandness is the idea that is being conveyed here by this Hebrew word that is pas. Whatever the case may be, it's this thing that he has, that Yosef has, that his other siblings don't have. And we can kind of, I would say, only look at Yosef, but so much before we look at Israel, at the father, to see what he actually does to kind of instigate this whole thing between the sons. Um, you know, it's one thing to to look to Yosef and deal with how he is, but I don't know how he becomes that without the parent, being the one that kind of, building that thing up in him. And so, we see it's interesting. We see kind of the same dynamic go on with between the wives as to where they kind of battled amongst each other and the favoritism that was shown and the way that it caused for them to deal with each other and to feel about things. It seems as if you have the exact same kind of dynamic going on that went on with the wives with uh with Yosef and the sons. You would think that um you know from going through all of that that they went through, you would think that lessons will be learned. But I guess those lessons are for those lessons are for us to learn, because we see it's a repeat. The same things that was going on with the parents, we see going on with the children, but it's all just focused on the one Yosef, who is this favored one. Now, when we think about the fact that it says, let me go back over here. Let me go back. When we think about this idea of this love that the father had for him over all his brothers, that he loved them more than them all, and they hated him. And so when we think about this dynamic and this word that literally means hate, this word that literally means hate, how can we look at the love that the father had for the son that resulted in this hate that kind of was bred by the other sons? Like, how can we, what, is there anything that we can say about this love, quote unquote, that he had um for his son Yosef, if we have this thing that resulted in this negative kind of feelings and emotions in the other sons? Can we say that that's a is this a righteous love?
No,
You say no. Why you say?
because it's dysfunctional. It's this breeding ground for dysfunction. When you show favoritism towards one child, and the other child can see it, feel it,
Yeah.
and then
So you
back.
saying favoritism? So can we call that love then? Favoritism then? Is that love or what is that?
It's showing favoritism when you love one more than the other.
But I'm saying, can we put that in the category of love though? I'm saying I don't know. I'm just
I mean, it is love because I'm sure this the wife he wanted. I'm sure it's the child he wanted.
yeah.
It's like everything that he initially wanted And then all this other stuff was added to him, due to possibly his tricky dealings himself. You know what I mean? It's like it's all like falling in line with kind of how things started.
Yeah.
From him and Esau. And if you think about the mothers, right? Who knows what the mothers were saying about the other mothers and their children to their sons, breeding that kind of like rivalry that they already had.
So will we say that the hate is justified then? Can we call that justified hate? I'm just saying, I don't know. I'm just asking. Because we can call the love dysfunctional love and say that there's problems with this thing that the father's doing as a result of his love. So we can talk against the love, but can we justify then the hate that the brothers had? And again, that word literally is that word for hate over there. Let's see. The thing that was in the brothers is this sane, which is, let's see here, to hate, personally, enemy, foe, be hateful, odious, utterly. Anybody has any thoughts about the justified hate? Nothing.
Well, the scriptures that talk about provoking not your children to anger.
What did that say? Did you find it?
I sure did.
Hold on, let me pull it up. What is it?
Colossians 3:21.
What does it say?
Fathers, provoke not your children to anger, lest they be discouraged.
So, by the love that's being given to the one child, you have this byproduct in the other child, which is this hate. Where it seems Paul is kind of drawing on that thought process in terms of dealing with the children. There should have been a way where he's able to love his favorite child, and not make it so that the other ones become jealous. I don't know if I have a favorite child or not, but if I did, I wouldn't say it, especially not in front of the other ones, because it would make them jealous.
Yeah, I mean, I have a case where my daughter's grandfather, shows favoritism to the youngest one, and the Ashkenazi guy. And you can see it. He buys her, like, all the kids will be there. He got 5 grandkids, and he'll bring one thing for the one favorite child, and the other ones will be there like,
where's mine?
Yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? And so that provokes something in me.
Yeah.
To anger. You know what I mean? So yeah, I mean, it's just a natural reaction.
Yeah. So I guess we not going to take it so far to talk about the justified hate, but at the very least, we're able to kind of understand. We can understand where these thoughts and feelings come from. based on um, you know, real life experiences, just understanding human interactions. That's how we are. We become jealous of things when these things come about. If we look at the character of the Most High, um, we see that he. Well, first of all, here, let's do this. First of all, let's see where that is. I know it's in First John. I think it's in 3. I can't do anything without looking in the actual book to find stuff.
You got one in James where it talks about the Most High not being showing partiality.
Yeah, I'm gonna go to the partiality, but I want to talk about the love part just right before that, because that is chapter 4. That's why I can't find it. It's in the wrong chapter. It's chapter 4. Okay, so let's see. 1 John 4:7. Read that right there.
So beloved, let us love one another, for love is of Yahweh. And everyone that loveth is born of Yahweh, and knoweth Yahweh.
And verse 8.
He that loveth not knowing, let me read it again. He that loveth not, knowing not Yahweh, for Yahweh is love.
He is love. It said Elohim is love. So the true essence of love then is a characteristic that is manifest through the Almighty. So his character traits, things that we can attribute to the character of the Most High, I would say there has to be a difference. So if I'm manifesting true love from the manifesting the character of the Most High, which is love, I don't understand how there could be a negative byproduct from that. I mean, maybe there could be, I don't know, but as far as my thinking, I don't understand how there could be a negative byproduct from when we talking about love in its purest form. And so that's why, when I look over at, you know, Israel's love for his son that creates hate in the other sons, that's why I wanted to put air quotes over it. Because I'm not sure if we're able to talk about that in terms of being what the essence of what love is. Now, what's your verse over there in James? What's that say?
That was James 3:17.
James.
The wisdom. I'll let you get there.
Okay, go ahead.
For the wisdom that is from above is first pure, then peaceable, gentle, and easy to be entreated, full of mercy and good fruits.
Oh, that's a good one right there.
Partiality and without hypocrisy.
Yeah. And we're gonna talk about this a little bit too here. But the wisdom that is from above is first pure. So if we talking about this idea of purity and love, then I'm saying that love in its purest form, we got to be able to this thing has to be able to be administered. This love, I would say, has to be administered in a way where the byproduct of my administration of love isn't hate. and that part I'm saying is was obviously lacking by um in this family situation. Just from the things that we can see, Yosef, he's coming back, he's telling on the brothers, getting them in. I don't know if they got in trouble or not. I don't know, but I would just seems like if they wasn't getting in trouble, it's putting something in the father's mind, like they're over here doing whatever. Like, so even if he didn't do anything to them as a result of the evil report, it's doing something inside of him. Or is it, look, this is my good son to come back and tell me all the things. If the only thing that it did was just put a little bit of something in his heart, yeah, that's good enough, right? And so there's that. We have this robe thing. He's walking around in this royal robe. Who knows what they got on? When you think about those people back in those days, it's not like we sit up here. We have drawers and closets full of clothes. Back then they had an outfit and like a cloak. Yeah, maybe till it starts stinking and then they washed it. You know what I mean? And that was it. Like it wasn't like they was going around in like different things, outfits for every occasion. Except Yosef had his little special thing. Now he had his long coat of many colors, right? And so you have him kind of being set aside and favored in this way, that's causing this partiality. So let's look at so we talking about the character of the Most High being love. We talk about this idea of wisdom that is from above. It says it's first pure. The first thing it is pure, right? So if you starting off with purity, you can't get corruption out of purity if you starting off with purity, right? Okay, so let's look at Deuteronomy, because we're talking about the character of the Most High being love, and then this thing that's being called love, um, that's directed from the Father to the children. That's causing there to be this hate from the brothers. Okay, so if we look at Deuteronomy 10, let's look at 17 and 18. What's that say? Oh, wait a second. Let me get this back over here. Okay, go ahead. 17 and 18. What's that say?
Yahweh Elohim, Elohim of mighty ones and master of masters, the great mighty and awesome. He shows no partiality nor takes a bribe. He executes right ruling for the fatherless and the widow and loves the stranger, giving him food and a garment.
Okay, very good. So when I look at this verse, I like this verse, these verses in scriptures, because it helps us to understand that we, as the followers of the Most High, we manifest the character of the Most High when we walk in this law, statutes, and commandments, right? Because over here, this says Deuteronomy 10 and 18. The he here is the Most High. The he here is the Most High, is Elohim. It says he executes right ruling for the fatherless and the widow, and loves the stranger, giving him food and a garment. The Most High does it, but the only way the Most High does it is when you do it, right? And so when we manifest, when we walk out the law, statutes, commandments, we manifest the character of the Most High in the earth, right? And so part of that over here is his character. He shows no partiality. He shows no partiality, right? And so that's part of his character. the Most High. Um,
That's a different message than they preach on the corner these days.
yeah, yeah. Well, I guess it depends on who you. I guess it depends on who you talking about. Let's look at what war these over here, right? Let's look at this Malachi. Let's see, 2, 8, and 9. What's that say?
It says, "But you have turned from the way. You have caused many to stumble in the Torah. You have corrupted the covenant of Levi," said Yahweh of hosts. It said, "And I also shall make you despised and low before all the people, because you are not guarding my ways and are showing partiality in the Torah."
Okay, so we see over here the negative of that situation, where on the one end we see where it talks about the fact that the Most High does not do that, and then over here he's talking about these priests over here who were doing it, right? So again, both dealing with the character of the Most High and the way in which the love was administered to um, Yosef. I mean, I'm saying that there must be a way that he's able to love Yosef the most and not cause all of these things that went on in the brothers. So again, when we look at this, we can see that just understanding how we as humans are, we can understand the feelings of the brothers. We wasn't able to call the hate justified, but we was able to at least understand where it comes from. So if we keep on going down, we go back to we're looking at 37. Does anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments as we go back?
I think it's interesting, and you still see kind of like the same traits playing out to this day within our communities, and you got cousins killing cousins from other neighborhoods and things like that still going on to this day, where families are just infighting and
Yeah. Yeah, we see where this little we see where this dysfunction, this right thing, it's right for you to love your child. We see where this right thing kind of goes left. Um, and another thing that I wanted to talk about is the fact that when we think about Yosef, and again we start off talking about the idea that his name having this prophetic significance. Now we can think about the fact that Yosef was destined for greatness, because again we talked about Joseph and the idea of how his mother, how Rachel named him in terms of how she was feeling, how she wanted to be added to. But from a prophetic standpoint, we can look at Joseph and understand that he, as an individual, will add to Israel, right? So he had, there was the idea of him being destined for greatness, but we see in Yosef, we're able to see the process. we're able to see him start from this child and his potential immaturity and where it goes to. Um and I guess I say potential immaturity, but when we think about that actually was a good verse over there, because when we think about, if we go back, what was that, 3 and what?
3 and 17.
We think about wisdom, right? Again, we think about wisdom. Wisdom is from the Most High. If we think about wisdom and what wisdom is, let's see if we put in here. If we put in here wisdom, Webster's wisdom. This over here says wisdom is the right use or exercise of knowledge. Right? I think this is the most concise, understandable understanding of what wisdom is. To be able to take knowledge and use it properly. That's what wisdom is. The right use or exercise of knowledge. And when we talk about wisdom, that's what wisdom is. And so we live in a time where wisdom is lacking. Knowledge is all over the place. People got all type of, and I don't even like to call it knowledge. To me, I just feel like it's just information. Right? But it's a whole lot of wrong use or exercise of knowledge going on. Right? And that's not what wisdom is. When we think about wisdom, it's easy to be able to apply wisdom to the Most High. We think about Proverbs chapter 8. We see where wisdom is the creator, right? Wisdom created everything, right? And so, again, that's that right use or exercise of knowledge. And so when we look at Yoseph, we can look at him and his dealings and say, even if he did have these dreams, was it right necessarily for him to go and say it to his brothers and then have a reaction and then like, well, I had this other dream too. And right, look, Dad, you was in the dream too. Right? And you was bowed down too, like they was. Right? I, I think that when we look at that, we can see that lacks in wisdom. So if we go here, let's go back over here. Wisdom is a principal thing. Wisdom is is key. We have a lot of people out here who have a lot of knowledge. Let's just give them. We give them knowledge, right? But they lacking in the wisdom. I could know things, but if I don't know how to administer the things that I have, it causes problems, right? Every time. And I can have the truth. I can have the unadulterated truth. I could have like all the answers, right? But if I'm not able to deliver those answers in such a way that you're able to receive the things, in fact, if I can't deliver those things without causing you to punch me in the face, that's not wisdom. Or want to kill me, right? That's not wisdom, right? So I can be right about a thing and you be wrong. But if I'm not able to convey my rightness, I'm not using wisdom. Right? It's something else. What you use wisdom or you didn't use wisdom?
Well, I thought it was wisdom. I thought I used, but it didn't work out well.
Okay, yeah. right. So it's not hard for us to be able to look to our experiences and find how unwise we can be at times,
They
right?
also call that a smart dummy. Mhm.
Yeah, right, right. Okay, so I wanted to let's see over here. Wisdom. Let's see what that is. 2451. Hook. Hookma. Hookma. This over here, this over here is the word for wisdom. It means this look here, skillful, right? Skillful. We read it in the English and seeing where it's the right use of knowledge, but it's skillful. You're able to take this thing and use it like in a skillful way. You know, I, I, I consider myself a craftsman in the, in my occupation, right? I work in construction, and we build things, right? And you have, unskillful, people coming up, learning the ways, the young apprentices, who come along, and they have to learn to be skillful, right? Over time, with training and experience and doing a thing, you gain that skill level rises, right? And so you're able to take all of the different tools and knowledge that you've accumulated over the years, and when you go and you do a particular job, you're able to, problem solve and look at your situation and figure out what it is you need, and you get all of your things that you need to do it, and then you do it in a way that it's not only done. See, it has to not only be done, but it has to look good at this also, right? So all of that has to do with skill. So if we're talking about that from kind of a communication aspect, is what we have over here in terms of Joseph being this person who has these dreams. He's this individual who's destined for greatness. He's going to be one who adds and brings a multiplicity to Israel. He's going to grow his people, but we're seeing him in this time where he has a lot of knowledge, but he doesn't have the right use. He's not skillful in his knowledge. And so these gifts that he has, this ability for him to be able to have these prophetic dreams, he's not able to convey these things properly. And so, we talked about this a while back when we talked about, we look at Samuel, where, he, was this one who was, going to actually be the prophet for the nation. But he needed to be trained. He needed to be shown the ways. He was he was called a prophet. He was this young prophet who was hearing from the Most High, but didn't even know that he was hearing from the Most High. Like, he didn't understand the voices that he was hearing, right? And so it took, him to be trained and showed, for him to be able to acquire these skills so that he was able to flourish in this gift that he had. When we think about, it's easy to think about like sports. You think about these people who just have this raw talent. They're very strong and fast naturally. But when you go from like a college level to a professional level, there's got to be something that's going on from the mental standpoint more, because everybody's strong and fast on a professional level, right? And so it needs that skill level has to kind of be um, cultivated some. And so again, when we look at Yosef, we see that, right? We see where he has this lack of ability to convey these true messages in a way that is acceptable by his family. Because look, when we look over here, let's see, verse 8. Verse 8. So this is his brothers, right? His brothers said to him, "So you shall indeed reign over us. Shall you indeed rule over us?" So they hated him even more. Even more. They already wasn't feeling him, and then they just now even more. It says for his dreams and his words. And so and then so after and then so after that, when it talks about him dreaming again in verse 11, verse 9 through 11, it goes down. He has this other one that includes his father in it, where it says that his father rebukes him, right? He hears his other dream where it talks about this sun and the moon and the 11 stars all bowing down to him. His father rebukes him, and his brothers envied him more. But then so my problem with that over here is that when we look at what happens in terms of his brothers going out in verse 12, his brothers go out to feed their father's flocks in Shechem, and then Israel sends Joseph out to kind of see what's going on with them, as if to bring back a report. So you have this kind of animosity that's created with the brothers. Israel even gets to the place where he's like, look, you can't, he rebukes them in some way. You can't, this ain't right for you to be. This got to be some other way. But then in his actions, he just kind of just facilitates this whole thing even more when he sends out Yosef out to go and spy basically on the brothers. And so it's like he's double minded almost. He's rebuking them for what he's doing, but then he's kind of, I feel like he's encouraging the dysfunction by sending the brother out to go out and kind of see what's going on with the other brothers to bring back, whatever it is. So again, we can't just look at Joseph and his part to play in this whole situation, but Israel, the father, is he's right there, for blame to be placed on him. So with this idea of thinking about Joseph in terms of being a picture of Messiah, up to this point, when we think about um, the fact that Yeshua, who was actually the manifestation of wisdom, right? If the word if Yeshua is the word being the manifestation of wisdom, Yeshua, when he walks around, um, being that word of truth, we able to see in Yeshua as he walked around how he was hated by his brothers, by things that he said, mostly the learned folk, the unlearned, they were drawn to him, whether it was because they wanted healing or wanted salvation from the situations that the people were in. But in with Yeshua, we see another kind of thing, because the hatred that was had for him, again, was from these people who, they probably felt a certain way because these are the learned people, the leaders in Israel. And then you have this person who's come along and he's stern. Yeah, this who's not in the scene, he's not in the mix, he's like a regular guy, right? This carpenter's son. He's not like a Levite. He's not one of these people who are like in the mix coming around, and he's got all of these words to say. Um, and so even though his words that he spoke uh, manifested hatred, the difference I would say is that when we look at that, we can see the kind of hypocrisy in the Pharisees and all of them, in terms of them having, if they would have had a right spirit about them. I'm saying hatred wasn't the natural consequence of what Yeshua was doing when he was, when he was out speaking. That was the wickedness actually in their hearts, causing them to be that way. So the similarities we can see is the fact that Yeshua's brothers hated him. The way that is different is that this is well, we wasn't able to justify the other hatred, but this hatred really is unjustified, right? um, and we can see that the problems. If we look closely, we can see the problems with the Pharisees and why it was that they did what they did, where it was a jealousy, but it wasn't out of righteousness. Um, but again, we can see that kind of correlation. When we think about Joseph, again, living up to his name in terms of being that one who will add to Israel, and the fact that he has this kind of this idea of being destined for greatness. When we think about Yeshua, right? He what happened here with this? We see that he was also destined for greatness as Messiah. What's this say over here? If we look at, what's this say here? What's Isaiah 9 and 6 and 7 say?
For a child is born unto us, a son is given unto us, and the rule is on his shoulder. His name is called Wonder, Counselor, Strong L, Father of Continuity, Prince of Peace. Of the increase of his rule and peace, there is no end upon the throne of David and over his reign to establish it and sustain it with right ruling and with righteousness from now on, even forever. The adorer of Yahweh of hosts this does this.
So when we think about this in terms of something being kind of this messianic prophecy, this thing that speaks of Yeshua, we could think about that and then think about Joseph sitting up there talking about the sun and the moon and these stars bowing down to him, which is kind of this grand thing, when the sun and the moon are giving obeisance to you. It kind of, that's pretty high up there, right? But when we look at this prophecy, that's this messianic thing. It's like unto that, right? Where when we look at Yosef, when we think about him and his life, he kind of did get to a place of greatness. Maybe not so much as the sun and the moon, but he was up there though. But again, we're able to see these pictures and these types and shadows with Joseph, and the idea of him being this one who is destined for greatness, and then also saying how Yeshua also is prophesied to be this one who is called all of these things over here, where the increase of his rule and peace there is no end, right? Okay, so let's go back over. Let's see here. Um okay, so let's also, when we think about the fact that when we look at in verse, let's see, let me go back to Genesis. She got exiled. Go back to Genesis 37. Let's see. Mm, 13. So here we see Israel said to Joseph, are not your brothers feeding the flock in Shechem? I send you to them. Right? So Yosef from the father gets sent out to the uh, brothers. Um, yes, to spy. Yes, he was kind of an agent. Um, think about. We can potentially think about this in another way, though. When we um, think about Shechem, right? When we just looked at Shechem, and we had the whole situation with them going in, and the daughter that got taken, and you know all that happened over there. Remember the idols that that Israel took from all of his people. He buried by the tree that was left over there in Shechem, right? And then so he buried these idols by this tree in Shechem, this place that they left. So we can potentially think about the fact that potentially there may have been more going on in Shechem than just feeding the flocks. If all they was doing was going over there just to feed the flocks, like, why do they got to get spied on? Like, what are they doing over there? They're just out working, really. Like, why is there this thought of suspiciousness over there if there wasn't potentially some funny business going on, right? And so we could think about the fact of Israel potentially sending Yosef out kind of to potentially, uh, not that he himself could prevent what they were doing, but if the father knew what they was doing, maybe he could speak to and deal with it. So we think about Yeshua when he came, um, where he was sent to his brothers, and we don't have to think about what they were doing, whether it was right or not. We know that it wasn't, right? And we know that he was sent out to them for purposes of righteousness and turning, right? Let's see, what's this say here?
Yeshua said to them, "My food is to do the desire of him who sent me and to accomplish his work."
So when we think about the work of Messiah and the work that he came to do, it was a restorative work, right? He was sent to restore his people, right? But specifically though, his people, though, his brothers, right? What's this say? What's 5:30?
Of myself, I am unable to do any matter. As I hear, I judge, and my judgment is righteous, because I do not seek my own desire, but the desire of the Father who sent me.
So again, we see that Yeshua being this sent one that's going out, sent from the Father to Israel, which is effectively his brothers over there again for these restorative purposes over here. What does this say here?
I mean,
Yeah, what's 38 and 39 say?
it's because I have come down out of heaven, not to do my own desire, but the desire of him who sent me. This is the desire of the Father who sent me, that all he has given me, I should not lose of it, but should raise it in the last day.
So if we think about the fact that maybe potentially there was something more than just flock feeding going on over in Shechem, um, we can think about Yosef and not just going and just spying just for spying's sake, but maybe if there was things going on that shouldn't been going on, maybe he could come back and say what's going on, and then we can deal with these things that's going on over here. When we think about Yeshua, so Joseph going out and doing this thing, not kind of this self-motivated thing, but this thing that was kind of instigated from the Father. And so when we look at Yeshua, where over here it's saying that he's not doing his own desire, he's going out and doing the will of the Father. What's chapter 12 say? What's this say?
He who rejects me and does not receive my words as one who judges him. The word, remember that blue word? That's a footnote.
Yeah.
So the word that I have spoken shall judge him in the last day, because I spoke not from myself, but the Father who sent me has given me a command what I should say and what I should speak.
I think that when we look at kind of the similarities over here, we see how the people, in terms of Yeshua, how the people dealt with Yeshua as if he was this guy who was going around and doing all of these things, and people not having an understanding of who he was and who had sent him from an earthly perspective, kind of um, not to justify what the people did towards him, but to be able to understand kind of from a human perspective what was going on with the people. You know, when you think about Yeshua as he had his earthly ministry, how, you know, they ended up actually, the reason that he was actually killed, the reason was the accusation was uh the accusation was blasphemy, right? Because of the things that he was doing, he was only doing things that could have been done or said by the actual heavenly Father. So the people are sitting here judging him in a way as if he's acting alone, right? And so the same thing actually also can be said in terms of Joseph. When we look at Joseph, who's being sent by his father, actually, the the brothers are treating him a certain kind of a way. When here, stop, don't have him playing over there. The brothers are treating Joseph a certain way, but in the meantime, all of this stuff is actually coming from the father in the first place. They're putting their aggression that they have towards him when it's the father that's kind of instigating this whole thing in the first place. Is misplaced aggression. They should be mad at the father, which I guess they, by doing something to the son, I guess they are doing something to the father, which they are, right? When we read where he said, you know, he just was unable, he was unconsolable, he was unable to be comforted when he received this terrible news of the killing, well, the supposed killing of his most favorite son. I wanted to look at a couple things also that we see. If we go down to, let's see, drop down to um, 21. Go
Genesis.
back to Genesis. Yeah, we go back to Genesis. Let's see, Genesis 7:21. We see that Reuben, right? We see it's interesting that Reuben kind of speaks up for his brother. And, you know, when they're sitting up there talking about, you know, killing him, verse 18, they saw him from the distance and plotted to kill him. And then Reuben over here in 21 is the one that speaks up for him. I I want to think I want to think rightly about Ruben, but it just seems like he just has ulterior motives over here, right? Because if we remembered, you know, he kind of has a falling out with the father from messing with his with one of his handmaids, right? And so maybe if Reuben is like the savior for the favorite son, it kind of helps his situation, you know, with his father. You know, if he can be like the savior of Joseph, you know, I saved him out of this pit, you know, and be the one that bring him back to to Israel, he's able to get some points. It's kind of crazy that they have so much problems going on over here just in the family. Just all of this just dysfunction in their situation.
I wonder what that situation would have looked like if that scenario would have played out. If Reuben, like after they left, would have came back, free him from the pit, took him home. I mean, what would have happened?
I mean,
The whole thing is crazy.
to me, I feel like it was so messed up that it probably would have just got turned around anyway. You know what I mean? Like turned into like, how could you let this happen to him or something? You know what I mean? Like I feel like it just was an unredeemable situation that had to play out all the way like it did. Well, we see that, right? We see that in the end that all of these things that happened was all the plan of the Most High. But it's just interesting to look back and see all of this, and we see what is going on. The fact that, again, when we think about the parallels, we see that it's his very brothers. It's the people who actually should love him and be protecting him are the ones who actually, are putting him in harm's way. And again, when we think about Yeshua, we understand that, Yeshua talks about the fact that, he lays, no man takes my life, right? He lays it down freely, right? But at the same time, these things in the physical realm have to happen. And so in the physical realm, we see that, Yeshua, Moshe, we see in the physical realm, physical people have to have problems with Yeshua and what he was doing in order to actually take him through these men's proceedings and pass judgment on him, in terms of the men passing judgment on him and doing these things to him from a physical perspective. So you have to have kind of these natural reactions to these things that he's doing so that these um, spiritual outcomes could come about. And so even though we know that it says that no man takes my life, I lay it down freely, he had to go through these actual physical processes. So we see these reactions that people are having, and it's a necessary part of the process for them to actually go through this stuff, right?
Almost like they went through, like even with Yosef, the humbling process before he was elevated. So he went through all of these, turmoil and all of these trials before he could become what he was supposed to be.
Yeah. And so in terms of this chapter, we see just the very beginnings of that. And so the first thing they take off this, it gets stripped of this glorious robe that he has. And again, looking back to Yeshua, when we think about the fact that Yeshua, in order to even come into this realm, right, where he steps here. Let's see. It's John. What does it say over here? I can't. I gotta look at my actual. Oh. See how easy that was? It's just stupid. Okay, verse 5. Read verse 5.
And now esteem me with yourself, Father, with the esteem which I had with you before the world was.
Okay, so when we think about the idea of Yeshua in his last moments, talking about being glorified or having his former esteem restored back to what he was before. So, in order to go back to his former glory, he had to remove that glory in order to come into this situation. And so, when we think about Yosef, who, in order to become the savior of his brothers, he had to come down from his high and lofty place, starting with that long, colorful robe, and then going down to the bottom of this pit, this well that was dug deep that had no water, this dry, waterless pit. When we think about water, we can think about the idea of cleansing and nourishment, refreshment. But he was in a pit that didn't have none of that stuff. Right? It was just dry and dark. It probably used to have water, so it probably was nasty. Um, Probably bugs and stuff down there, and just the foulest of places where he just was left.
Dark.
Yeah, dark and dreary, hopeless. Just imagine being in this place, this this pit that you can't escape, and you're just stuck there. I guess it's not that hard to imagine. You think about things long enough. We're kind of in this place that you can't escape. All right, that was. I don't want to think about this place anymore, right? So looking at Joseph again, it's easy to look at the parallels between the two because in order for him to even make it to the next step, again, the correlations. This, he wasn't dead, but for all intents and purposes, there's death, right? As far as Israel's concerned, his son is gone. He's dead, right? He's no more. And in the context of the chapter, that's where he is. We can think about what happens later, but just dealing with chapter 37, we see that Yosef, who was at this place of high esteem, with the father, um, basically at the right hand of the father. He comes from the right hand of the father, and he goes down into this, um, this dark and dreary pit that he was thrown in by the brothers. Um, Verse here. Let's go back over here. Let's go back over to Genesis 37. Look at Genesis 37. Look at verse 26. What does that say right there?
It says, and Judah said to his brothers, what would we gain if we kill our brother and conceal his blood?
So Judah over here is talking about if we just kill the brother, you know, he trying to make money off of the situation.
Yeah, he's trying to come up.
Right? Judah.
I like him today too.
But it's interesting that you have the brothers that speak up. We see Reuben, who, of course, we can think about why potentially he may have been one of the ones who want to sit up here and benefit from it. But Judah also is wanting to benefit from it. But when we think about Yeshua, um, the one who betrays him is the same. Judas is just the Greek form of Judah. It's the same name. So when we think about the one who's forever known as the one who you don't see in the New Testament that every time it talks about Judas, it always has that little parenthetical, the one that betrayed Yeshua. That's his claim to fame. He's infamously known as the betrayer now. But it's interesting that it's Joseph, has the same problem with his brother by the same name. Okay, so all right, so when we look at we talked about Yosef and his coat. We talk about the fact that he was, for all intents and purposes, dead. He experiences this type of bodily demise, this betrayal by his brothers, namely Reuben and Yehuda. They take his cloak and they shed blood on it. Joseph, what's it say? Is sold into servitude over here. We know that he's sold into servitude over here, but as far as the father knows, he's dead. And so again, when we think about Joseph, just in these beginning, processes of this situation that goes on with him and his brothers, we're able to kind of, if we was going to try to pull from these experiences and try to, kind of think about how we are able to draw from just what we have in this chapter here to kind of gain from we talked about the idea of wisdom and operating in wisdom and being able to we have to be able to get to a place where if we have this truth, if we have this thing that is indeed right, we have to be able to convey it in a way where it's able to be accepted and received by the hearer, right? Because that's the reason why you would be expressing it in the first place. I guess to a degree, it can become offensive to the hearer. But I think that that offense, it has to be in a way where it's not so much that you are feel a way towards the messenger, but that you're able to kind of be introspective about the actual message. The the gospel message, I guess it can be a sobering experience to understand the condition of man and the necessity of redemption that we're in. um and I guess the conveyance of the message, I guess has to come around to people understanding, where they fit into the situation. Um, and so, you know, that is where the wisdom comes in. When you're able to convey this message of the fact that, you are this person who has offended the Most High. And you are actually this person who actually is worthy of death. But there is a way to get on the other side of that. Um, and that way comes through. I mean, I guess it has to be a humbling experience, right? You have to kind of um, go through almost the experience that we see with Joseph, where he's actually taken to his lowest, literally the lowest possible place he's under the earth. um so many times I think the message gets construed, and pride you know lifts us up and causes us to be you know higher first. But it seems like we got to get lower first. You know that you can't get it unless you get low, and that I think that becomes a real problem. It's almost like we can see the process of redemption through looking at over here with Joseph, where he's not able to be a help to his brothers until um he goes all the way to the bottom first. He goes all the way to the bottom first. He's not lifted up on high and just stay up there and just everything is just right. Even though he has this great and lofty these abilities that he has to dream these dreams. He gets these messages which are obviously from on high. But still he has to go through the processes and literally go all the way to the bottom and be built all the way back up so that he's able to deliver these things. This is a hard thing for people to grasp. You get this thing in you and it's just like, I got to just, I got to get out here and just do the things. But we see these people going through processes first. What was you gonna say? What?
Before you can be built up to be used by the Most High, you got to be broken first.
You got to be broken first.
Or you can be broken second. You could fall on the rock. I had a rock fall on you.
But it must be part of the process. It must be part of the process. Yeshua had all that stuff to do, right? Yeshua is the savior of mankind. But the only way he gets that job done, he had a great ministry, healing, doing all types of miracles and all of that stuff. But before his job was able to be complete, he had to die. He had to die first. Right? Now that him dying again in the processes of things in terms of him being a sacrifice and the Passover lamb and all of these technicalities in the situation are all there. But just but when we think about this kind of in his, the bottom thing, he literally had to get and be the lowest they could possibly be.
He didn't just die. He was demoralized.
All that.
He was beaten.
All that.
He was shamed.
Mm-hmm.
False accused.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, all of the things that, nobody wants to be. He had to go through that.
And when we think about it, it's like at the end of his story. When we look at the Gospels, that's like at the end of his story. But in terms of redemption and salvation, that's the beginning. That's the starting point. It starts from there. In his life story, that's the end. But for us, it starts at him being at the bottom. And so how can we as people think that our process ain't that?
We see T.D. Jakes and Gruffalo dancing on money.
Oh my goodness. I don't know why. Yeah.
If you ain't got $1 million, something wrong with you.
Yeah. And so I think that again, when we think about looking at Joseph and his process here again at the beginning of the process, I think that it's necessary for us to be able to remember and think about the idea of becoming low so that we can be lifted up.
Well, the funny thing is, it's like even you can think about it, but most people gotta have it happen. So.
What do you mean? Oh, you talking about be made to be low? You mean?
Yeah. To really understand it,
Well,
I mean,
that's what happened to Joseph. He didn't want to be that.
Right.
It is something that happened to him.
Yeah. Even Yeshua, he understand what his purpose was and what he had to do. He prayed to the Father like, "Pass this cup from me."
Yeah.
Because of what it meant, how heavy it was. So I don't know. Let's see if you're 60.
You know what? Yeah, that's absolutely right.
Moses, like
let's kind of remix this a little bit. Then we think about the idea of not even to say that you have to make yourself low, but expect to be made low.
Yeah, that's better. Yeah.
Because again, it's part of the process. As part of the process, we don't see no examples of these people just, we think about King David, who, is the apple of the Most High's eye, right? He had some terrible things happen to him in his life. Mm-hmm. Terrible things. Terrible. And why was it like that? Pride. His position and pride that he was lifted up to caused him to do things that that he resulted in this thing. Death never left his house, it says, right? Yeshua, we talked about Yeshua, who literally went through all of those things so that our restoration can be realized. So, when we look at this again, looking at Joseph, who is a perfect picture of Yeshua, when we look at Joseph, where this is just beginning, he's not able to add he's not able to fulfill his prophetic name without going through this tremendously low place first. And so again, when we think about the idea of being followers of Messiah and being lights in this world, um it takes um a process for you to actually become light, and part of that process is a humbling. So if you didn't ever have that, I guess you better get ready, right?
After the fire.
Prepare your soul for temptation, because you come to serve the Most High.
Yeah,
You have to.
yeah,
It's like entry. It's like, oh, you want to be on the Most High side? Well,
yeah,
you just ain't getting in because you feel like it,
yeah.
I'm ready.
Mhm.
It's induction.
Yeah.
That's like the induction.
There's a breakdown part. There's a breakdown process where we looking at Joseph. He started off high. He started off high, but in order to become who his name said that he is, the one who will add, the first thing that we see is him being subtracted from. That's how his journey begins. That's how he gets to the place where he's able to add, is that him first being subtracted from. And so if we was to think about our journeys as we walk in this life, we have to expect, for before there's a plus sign, it got to be that minus sign. There's stuff in each and every one of us that can't we can't move forward with those things.
Stuff, people, all kind of
all that, etc., etc. Them things got to come off. Those people got to be removed. All of those things. If we think about Israel, who was going to be a beneficiary of the adding, that was the worst thing that could have happened to him, Joseph being dead. But in order for him to be able to get to that place of greatness and become this great nation, he had to have the worst thing possible ever that he could even think of happen, being the loss of his most beloved son. Look at Abraham. Abraham spent all that time trying to have a child. And then the way that the Most High was able to know that he was fit for to be who he was, he says, all right, well, just give me the son back then.
Yep.
Right? That was the worst thing that he could have heard. But that's what the Most High had required of him, at that time. And so I'm saying that, how do we think that it's just like, oh, I'm Israel. All right, I'm going to just start living the ways now, and there ain't going to be no pit. There ain't going to be no stripping of our long coat of many colors, or no death of our firstborn. We think about Israel as a whole. The way that Israel became a nation was through this huge battle coming out of Egypt. Not that Israel fought, but they certainly went through it. And this certainly was a thing for them to go from, even if you just talk about just going through and witnessing this whole ordeal of the plagues and coming out of Egypt, that was a thing. It wasn't just like a smooth just transition from here to there. And then if you talk about getting into the land, that's a whole other situation. 40 years. The adults didn't even make it. And so, saying all that just to say, when we think about, specifically what we learn from looking at the beginning of the life of Joseph and thinking about how our journey, you know, will indeed be as we move forward in Messiah. I'm saying that we must expect um, the fire.
He said, what he said, him that he loveth and you chasten.
That's what he said.
That's what he said. So if you ain't getting chastened, then you gotta be like,
he don't love you, obviously.
Yeah, he ain't love you. People out here in the world got it cool, and you think, their life is dead. That's not where you want to be at. Even though it look good.
Yeah. There's things that you must go through, and there's correction that the Most High will bring to you as His people. And so, if you're not getting no correction, I wonder, is you His people? I mean, those are things that we got to think about. We got to think about those things, because that's what He said. The ones that He loved, He chastens. Oh, we can go back and think about how Israel loved Jacob. All he's ended up doing, how Israel loved Joseph. If all he's ended up doing is showering him with gifts and building him up and making him be all this way about himself, can we really call that love? I don't know if we can. It's because it certainly wasn't preparing him for life. Just to only get and get and get and get and no, not working for nothing. I could just imagine him sitting around, looking at his brothers while they sitting up there doing these things. He's out there with them. He ain't doing nothing. He just like them people you be sitting over there messing with all day. So okay, so I'm saying just kind of just in closing, again, we have to be able to gain from these things and be able to add these things to our lives. And I think that, when we look at Joseph and the fact that, he went from being this, he was this loved, favored individual. But knowing that, he has this name to live up to, the fact that he will add this name Yosef that he has to live up to, there's a cost. There's a cost that goes with that. And the same thing is true for each and every one of us when we decide that we want to live this life and walk in the ways of the Most High and be lights in this world of darkness. There's a cost. It costs something. It can be significant. And so we just have to be ready and willing to pay the cost, to count the cost before we go and buy the field, right? You count the cost. All of the things that goes into it. We got to live our lives like we sit up here and buy stuff online. You know what I'm saying? You got to go and look at the reviews and see what goes into what you getting yourself into. You got to know, full disclosure, what you getting yourself into, right? It's not just peaches, proverbial peaches and cream. There must be a journey, and there must be a removal of things, and what better example do we see than all of the things that made Joseph great, just quickly be taken away, and him just become just this ordinary kid again in the bottom of this hole, helpless, at the mercy of whoever comes the highest bidder, right? Okay, so does anybody have any thoughts or questions or comments about any of this stuff that we looking at here, dealing with Joseph and the beginning of his plight, or anything else for that matter? Nothing. Okay, so that being said, for now, I guess we will be done with this. Next week, y'all willing, we will continue on and see what else goes on with Yosef, and in his transformation in his journey, and see more of how we're able to see Messiah through the life of Joseph. Okay, that being said, we will say Shabbat Shalom.
Shalom.
Okay.
The Joseph experience. I know about it. I don't know about the whole elevator part yet. You know what I'm saying? But I know about the bottom part. Take it now.
Yeah.